Welcome to GovReport, a conversation about government, politics, and technology. I'm Christina Gagnier, and today I'm joined by Lloyd Levine, who has served in multiple roles, including a former California state legislator who chaired the Utilities and Commerce Committee, a former member of Governor Schwarzenegger's Broadband Task Force, a senior policy fellow at the UC Riverside School of Public Policy, and he now serves as National Senior Executive for State Government Strategy at T-Mobile. Great to have you, Lloyd. Welcome.
Glad to be on with you. It's good to see you again.
Yes, good to see you again as well. So our conversations at GovReport center around one driving question for the conversation. And today's conversation centers around ever-evolving technology in government and outside of the government sector, and how procurement processes can keep up to pace with technologies that literally update themselves. So as an initial question, where do you think there's room for growth and some of the dysfunction that needs to be addressed?
Well, that's a really huge question. There's a number of areas. I'm going to kind of start from where I come from, and I think about these things in terms of the next generation, what I call Generation T. Those people who've grown up in a technology bubble. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It just means they've grown up in circumstances where technology is so completely around them, it's unavoidable. Born in about 2000, when broadband was reaching homes. It was reached 70% penetration in 2010. The iPhone came out in 2007, the Samsung in 2011. So that generation of folks are going to grow up and engage with the government and be the government employees. And the government is notoriously bad. And I'm not speaking specifically of California. Generically, government is notoriously bad at adopting, integrating, and staying on the cutting edge of technology. So I come at this with the question of how is government, and I come at this as somebody who cares about government, who spent a lot of their life in government, how is government going to attract that next generation of workers when I have more technology in my house, in my car, than I might have access to in the workplace? How are those folks who are used to making reservations, not by picking up the phone, by opening an app? How are those people going to engage with government that doesn't necessarily meet them on their terms? And so I look at that, and that's where I see room for growth. I see government's ability to understand and adapt to and then integrate technologies of the future, communications technologies, and really an IoT technologies as a key driver of government service in the future.
Well, in the larger technology sector, there's that idiom about move fast and break things. And in government, no one wants to make a mistake. So how can government move past this mentality? What can we do to allow government the ability to innovate?
And you're very right. I mean, Google's got Project X. If you're going to fail quickly and move on to the next one. And then Thomas Edison is famous for saying, I didn't fail. I discovered 1,000 ways that didn't work. But we don't have that in the public sector. Our procurement laws, particularly, are built to address not technology but scandal. We need to acquire things, and then whenever a scandal comes up, we address our laws and change them. And that, I understand that. I'm not arguing that we shouldn't do that. But what's happened is we now end up treating, as I've said, recently, we treat technology in 2021 like we treated pencils in 1950. The pencil was the yellow pencil that we're all so famous with, that we all are familiar with, was invented in 1890. Pencils predated that, but the yellow pencil, that ubiquitous yellow pencil that we all took the SAT with, was invented in 1890. The yellow pencil today is substantially similar to that pencil. My Samsung Galaxy didn't exist 10 or 11 years ago. And so you need to figure out how we're going to change the laws to allow government to procure those technologies without having the scandals of the past. I mean, one thing that I did when I was in the legislature, and it's a small thing, but and I honestly don't know how much it helped or didn't help, but we changed the law for school technology purchases to go to least cost, best fit. So the schools are now allowed to choose from the 3 lowest bidders. If the second technology is a better fit but slightly more expensive, they're not forced to procure a lesser appropriate technology. We can look at lots of different ways that we can change the laws, in keeping in mind 2 basic principles. We want transparency and prevention of scandal, and we want to integrate new technologies, and then from there build a new system.
Well, the current administration, one example being the Office of Digital Innovation, but just also generally a focus on technology and policy around technology, has really tried to change the dynamic around things like procurement, the use of government technology, and sort of creating an ecosystem where there is more innovation and conversation around innovation. What do you think some successes have been under this administration, and where do you think there's room for growth?
I mean, the biggest success is getting that office created. The fact that we've made this, that Governor Newsom has made that a priority is huge. What they're doing, we'll see. I mean, we'll see where the biggest successes turn out to be. I think looking at the government service model from a client perspective instead of from an agency perspective, and I don't know the data for California, but I was just at the NASCIO conference and I was talking to folks from multiple states. Pennsylvania comes to mind, New York comes to mind, their CTOs, their CIOs, they have more records than they have population. And that's because if you fill out your name in one form as Lloyd Levine, and then the next form at a different agency is Lloyd E. Levine, I've now created two records for the same person. So shifting some of that, I think, can be, and then when you have one record, that allows you to open up other possibilities for digital connectivity. And I would be remiss if I didn't also say the important work that the administration and others outside are doing to close the digital divide. Because while I like to sit here and talk about all these new technologies and what government needs to do, the fact of the matter is most of these technologies are internet-based, internet-driven that we're talking about. There are others, Internet of Things, that aren't consumer-facing that don't fall into this category. But if 20% of your population doesn't have access to broadband, whether it's because of their income level or their geography, that's a problem. You're not going to be able to deliver those cutting edge services. So the work that they're doing in the governor's office and at the PUC, and the California Emerging Technology Fund to make sure everybody has that connectivity is also an essential component that often gets overlooked as we like to talk about all of the apps and the technology.
And how do we meet those people that are part of that 20%? I mean, digital inclusion has been an issue, throughout the United States and in the state for quite a while. What are some ways that either agencies and people within them can think about bridging that gap?
Well, there's several ways. Most of the companies, and T-Mobile has this, have discount offerings for low-income individuals. We are happy to work with low-income populations and the government to ensure that everybody has access to the internet. The company realizes that internet access in 2021 is an essential part of American civic life, that without it, you don't have access to healthcare institutions, government institutions, educational institutions. And so, we want to work to be part of that solution. Digital literacy skills go part and parcel with that. And those, I think as we go forward, that will help take care of itself a little bit because the next generation is going to be more digitally literate. We can learn lessons from the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, my daughter had, in first or second grade, she had a half an hour of internet-based homework every night. We just set her up on the internet with the computer. But what about those, and the percentages dropped, but what about the 30% of the students, or whatever the percentage of the school district was, who didn't have internet access? They weren't all doing it at the library after school. Were they just not doing it? I don't know. So when the pandemic hit, everybody really suddenly realized what a lot of us have known all along, the depth of and the pervasive nature of the digital divide, and we work to address it. But we need to ensure that we keep those things in place. One of the interesting ideas that I've had is, and we saw this executed during the pandemic, the school district went in and negotiated for broadband. Instead of leaving it up to the individual families, the school district realized during the pandemic that broadband was as essential to those students as their textbooks were. Well, I don't think you and I, lack the knowledge that even after the pandemic, broadband is just as essential to a student's success. So let's continue that model. We can't solve everybody's problems, but we can certainly focus on school-age students and ensure that that they have internet access. And we can do that without building private networks. We can do that without building school district networks. We can do that by providing them the funding, by negotiating and providing them the access through the funding, just the same way we did in the pandemic.
So schools are a great example of institutions that during the pandemic had to move very fast and make decisions about technology. and they really didn't have the agency to take their time. We had to get students, back online and back learning as quickly as possible. What do you think generally are some lessons that government can learn from having to adopt technology so quickly in the pandemic?
Wow, that's a great question. I actually honestly haven't really thought about that. I guess it's a lesson that repeats itself though. And in the academic world, we call it, say the Overton window, to use one term, a focusing event. You can spend a lot of time arguing and battling to a stalemate when nothing happens. But then suddenly you have some sort of occurrence, a natural disaster or a pandemic that suddenly brings everything to focus, and nobody has time to argue. We just need to get broadband to these kids, and you do it like that. Looking at why that happens and understanding why that happens, and then applying that, in non-emergency times could be very useful. Going back to your earlier question, I think we need to try and figure out how to alleviate the fear of failure. That I think is one of the biggest problems, and I understand it. I understand it intimately as a former government official. You don't want the scandal happening on your watch. If you are in an agency and your agency is trying to implement a technology upgrade and it's $800 million over budget and 3 years delayed, you're going to be sitting on a chair in a committee room with legislators grilling you, and nobody wants that to happen. So we paper the process. In layer after layer of bureaucracy, so everybody can point and say, I follow the process, I follow the process. Oh, okay, well, you follow the process, but what's the outcome? So I don't have an answer to how do you adopt those models from the pandemic. I think perhaps some of it might have to go with having honest conversations with the public and with the media. Now that's harder these days because the media is not just sitting down with an editorial board. This is media. There's media who have agendas. And so if their agenda is to make an individual or something look bad, then that's a challenge that you need to overcome. But having that conversation, like, yeah, we're going to make mistakes, we're going to fail, but so does everybody else. And it doesn't mean we like it, but your choice right now is to fail while trying to accomplish something, or to not fail while stagnation occurs.
Well, Lloyd, I want to thank you again for joining me today in this conversation. And once again, I'm Christina Gagnier with the GovReport, and thank you for our audience for tuning in.